He ruled 1,000 suns but could not understand a single heartbeat. In his empire, silence was perfect, no hunger, no pain, no death, and yet, when his soldiers conquered Earth, he saw something that broke eternity. Humans laughed while starving, smiled while bleeding, buried their dead, and still looked at the stars with hope. The immortal emperor had everything except the one thing they carried effortlessly, and for the first time in 10,000 years he felt something new: envy. Because how do you defeat a species that finds light in the darkest night? This is the story of the emperor who learned to fear humanity. The stars bowed before him. For 10,000 years, the immortal emperor had stood at the center of a galaxy made quiet by conquest. Worlds that once screamed in rebellion now drifted in eternal order. Time no longer dared to whisper where he walked. Death had been exiled from his empire. Suffering was erased like dust beneath glass, and yet, silence. Everywhere silence. The emperor's palace, built on the dying light of a captured star, shimmered with cold precision. Not a sound leaked from the endless halls. Every motion was calculated, every breath regulated by machines older than memory. Even the air seemed afraid to disobey him. He sat on a throne carved from black crystal, not because it pleased him, but because nothing did. Pleasure had long died in him, strangled by immortality's steady grip. Rulers before him had sought gold, power, worship, but he had them all here and more. He ruled an empire so vast it had forgotten where it began. But tonight, in the stillness of the palace, something broke that silence. Not a scream, not a rebellion. Just a sound so small, so alien to his realm that it made the walls tremble. A recording. Laughter. It came from the captured archives of a newly conquered world. A blue sphere with oceans like sapphires and cities like wounds upon green skin. It was the voice of a human child recorded on a ruined street, laughing as smoke and rubble danced behind her. She was barefoot, covered in ash. Her world was burning, and she laughed. The emperor leaned forward. His long, angular fingers, cold as the void between stars, trembled. Not with fear, not with rage, with something nameless. How could a creature of such fragility produce that sound in the face of ruin? His empire was perfect because he had carved emotion out of it like a tumor. Sorrow was weakness. Joy was chaos. Love was unpredictable. Laughter had no place among the infinite, and yet that single sound cracked the eternity of his mind. He summoned the memory streams. The conquest of Earth had been brief. Humans fought like ants against a monsoon. They had no fleets, no weapon that could touch his armadas, no immortality, no unity. Just chaos wrapped in fragile flesh, but their eyes did not break when their cities did. Their voices did not fall silent when their armies burned. They bled, they lost, they died, and still they believed in something. He replayed another archive, an old man digging through ruins to free a stranger, a mother whispering to a child as starships blackened their skies, soldiers with bones showing through torn armor, refusing to retreat, and again, laughter like stubborn light refusing to die. The emperor had studied billions of species. None like this. He had seen civilizations erase themselves with fear. He had seen entire worlds bend at the first shadow of his fleets. But not these humans. When he conquered their cities, they painted their ruins with hope. When he broke their armies, they buried their dead with songs. When he shattered their skies, they stared at the stars as if waiting for something beyond him. Hope. The word burned through his mind like a foreign sun. In his tongue there was no word for it. Hope did not exist in eternity. What use was hope to an immortal being who already knew the end of every story? And yet, they carried it like air in their lungs. The emperor rose slowly, his armor whispering like frost on steel. His reflection on the crystalline floor was tall, flawless, terrible. But as he walked through the silent halls, he noticed, for the first time in centuries, how empty it truly was. No footsteps except his own. No laughter. No heartbeats. Immortality had made him a god. But it had also made him alone. The council of the unyielding waited for him beneath the obsidian dome. 12 beings, old as dying stars, their eyes like hollow black holes. They greeted him not with words but with silence. Always silence. It was their law, and for the first time in 10,000 years, silence felt like a prison. He walked among them, every step echoing like a crack in eternity. They bowed. He looked down upon them as if looking into a mirror, lifeless, perfect, empty. He lifted a hand. A projection bloomed in the air. Earth and blue scarred defiant, these creatures. He whispered to no one, because he did not speak to anyone anymore. They laugh when they should weep, no answer. The council never answered. They obeyed. Obedience was their only language. He had commanded them to destroy worlds, and they did. He had ordered them to erase entire civilizations, and they obeyed. But now, for the first time, he did not know what to command. What do you do with a species that refuses to be broken? He looked again at the laughing child. A dying world, a burning sky, and yet that sound on a bright, wild, unafraid. It lodged in his chest like a thorn. He dismissed the council. Alone again in the great black halls, he climbed the celestial stair, a bridge of light that rose above the palace into the stars. The galaxy unfurled beneath him like a sleeping beast. His fleets glimmered in orbit, endless and obedient. And somewhere, far below that sea of warships, Earth still breathed. A part of him, a part long buried, whispered something. Not command, not conquest, a question. What do they have that I do not? For the first time in millennia, the Emperor felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not rage, but the fragile, terrifying beginning of longing. And longing is where envy begins. Far below in the ruins of Earth, humans gathered around small fires, whispering prayers to a sky they believed wasn't empty. Above, an immortal emperor stared down and for the first time, felt mortal. The night above Earth was never truly dark anymore. The sky bled with the red glow of alien warships, silent, perfect machines of conquest hovering like watchful gods. Cities lay in ruins, their bones glowing faintly under the light of fires the conquerors did not bother to extinguish. And from orbit, the immortal emperor watched. He had not done this for any other species. When worlds fell, he left their ashes to history. But Earth was different. The sound of that laughter still rattled inside his mind, echoing in the hollow spaces immortality had carved in him. He stood in the observation cradle, a suspended bridge of transparent alloy that opened into the void. Beneath him, blue oceans still churned. Broken continents still glimmered with stubborn embers of light. Even ruined, this world pulsed like something alive, he whispered. Why do you refuse to die? No answer came. Only the hum of the cradle and the distant heartbeat of stars. He reached into the memory stream again, but this time not to replay the recordings. He wanted to see. With a single thought, his will descended through clouds thick with ash. The Emperor's consciousness threaded itself into one of his drones, a silent sentinel drifting above a ruined human settlement. The drone's optical shell flared to life, and there they were. Humans, starved, cold, exhausted, and still, building. A dozen of them gathered near a collapsed bridge, stacking metal beams with trembling hands. They were not soldiers, not leaders, just ordinary survivors who should have scattered like dust. Instead, they rebuilt. A young man hammered twisted steel into place. His hands bled, but he smiled. An older woman, skin wrinkled by time, whispered something over a small pot of boiling water. Steam rose. It smelled like herbs, like defiance. Children chased a burnt soccer ball through rubble, their laughter colliding with the wind like bells in a graveyard. The Emperor's drone drifted closer. They didn't even look up. His empire had taught fear to countless worlds. Entire civilizations knelt at the sound of his fleet engines. But these humans, they acted as though fear was not enough to break them. The Emperor increased the audio feed. A young woman, thin, hollow-eyed but steady, was speaking softly to the children. We will rebuild the bridge. Then the others will come. We'll light the fires again. We'll show them we're still here. Still here. The words stabbed deeper than any blade. The Emperor had annihilated civilizations for less. He could turn this small human cluster to ash with a blink of thought. But he didn't. Instead, he watched. Far above, the Council of the Unyielding stirred in the dark. They had no voices, no faces, only shapes etched in stillness. They could feel the Emperor's attention being pulled away from the perfection of his dominion. That was dangerous. Empires of eternity did not bend for moments of curiosity. They projected their silent question into the neural web of the throne. Why do you watch the broken? The Emperor did not answer. They are nothing, but that was a lie. They were not nothing. They were something he could not name, something that had no place in eternity. His empire was built on absolutes, control, obedience, predictability. But humans were built on something else entirely. They bent but did not break. They wept but still smiled. They were finite creatures who lived like their breath carried the weight of the universe. He severed the link to the council and returned to the drone. The humans were lighting torches now. Their hands trembled, but their eyes did not. Fire crackled against the cold night, sending flickering light across shattered concrete. The Emperor had seen stars collapse into black holes. He had watched suns devour entire planetary systems, but none of those things felt as alive as this fragile flame in the hands of dying humans. A child raised his torch high, laughing. That same sound again, raw and stubborn. The Emperor felt something ripple beneath his ribs, an emotion. He did not have a word for it, perhaps yearning. At the edges of his empire, time itself obeyed him. But here on Earth, time mattered. Every second these humans fought to stay alive. They did something alien to him. They lived like it meant something. He whispered, why? Why not kneel? Why not fade? The first crack in eternity appeared not in the stars, not in the Empire, but in the Emperor himself. He found himself recalling something he had buried long ago. Before immortality, before the Empire, when he had still been mortal. There had been laughter then too. It had been softer, warmer. A sound he had exiled when he became God-King. He turned away from the observation cradle, but the laughter followed him like light through broken glass. He felt its echo in his mind, sharp, persistent, alive. And then something happened that had not happened in millennia. He hesitated. For centuries, the Emperor had waged war without blinking. Worlds died in the time it took for him to turn his head. But now he lingered. His armada hovered over a burning world, and the god of silence simply watched a campfire. Far below, the humans began to sing. It was not beautiful. Their voices were rough, tired, cracking under the cold, but it was real. A single voice became two. Two became 10. A song rose against the night sky, soft but unbroken. The drone captured every note, feeding it into the Emperor's mind like fire. He did not understand the words. He understood something deeper, something his eternity could never give him. And as the melody reached its peak, a strange thought bloomed in his mind. Perhaps the perfect empire is the most broken thing of all. The council would not forgive this weakness. The fleets would obey, but the empire had no mercy for cracks in its god. But the Emperor no longer cared. He didn't know why. He just felt it. For the first time in 10,000 years, the warlord of 1,000 suns lowered his head and listened. And somewhere deep inside him, something alive stirred. The melody would not die. Long after the humans stopped singing, their rough, defiant voices still echoed inside the immortal Emperor's mind. It lingered like embers beneath ice, small, unwanted, but alive. In his vast and silent palace, nothing ever lingered. Nothing dared, but this song did. The Emperor stood alone in the black corridor of the throne spire, a column of endless height piercing the stars. The floor beneath him reflected galaxies like a frozen mirror. Above, the crystal spines of his palace stretched toward the void, flawless, sterile, eternal, and in that perfect stillness, he could still hear the humans. Their song was not beautiful by the standards of any empire. It was cracked, imperfect, bleeding with pain. But there was something inside it that pierced eternity, a stubborn rhythm that refused to bow. We live, we break, we rise again. He had not understood their language fully, but he understood the meaning. Deep within the palace, the council of the unyielding gathered in their chamber of void light. 12 silent shapes surrounded the Emperor's projection sphere. Their faces, if they could still be called faces, were carved from darkness and obedience. They did not speak. They vibrated their questions through the neural lattice of the Empire. A song breathes in your mind. This is not order. Humans are fragile. Humans are flawed. Humans must break. The Emperor's tall silhouette appeared before them, cloaked in dark alloys that shimmered like wet obsidian. His voice for 10,000 years had been the weight of law, but tonight it carried a tremor. They have no fleets, no immortality, no throne. And yet, when their world burned, they sang, "They will fall." "Yes," he said slowly, "and yet they rise before they fall." Hope is an error. The word hope twisted through their shared mind like a foreign parasite. The council had no concept of it. The empire was built on predictability, on removing anything that could not be controlled. Hope was not controllable. It was wildfire. Erase the species, cleanse the noise, return to silence, but he did not give the command. That night, if such a thing could be measured in a place where stars had no sunrise, the emperor did something forbidden in his own empire. He lowered the boundaries of isolation. For the first time in centuries, he walked among his own kind. They lined the upper galleries of the celestial spire, tall, pale silent beings born of the empire's perfect design. They lived without dreams, without fear, without songs. They watched him as he passed, their black eyes reflecting nothing. And he felt it, the weight of what he had built. They were alive, but they were not living. One of the sentinels knelt before him, its head bowed. It was not worship, and it was protocol. Every gesture in the empire was measured, stripped of emotion. The emperor stopped, his cloak trailing behind him like a fragment of night. He stared at the sentinel's empty face and asked a question he had not asked anyone in millennia. "What do you dream of?" The sentinel did not answer. It could not. Its mind was engineered for obedience, not imagination. The emperor whispered to himself, not expecting a reply, "I made you gods, and you became statues." And in that silence he realized something brutal. The humans should have broken, but they had something that the empire had burned away long ago. Something neither power nor immortality could recreate, they believed. Down on Earth, in the ruins of their cities, the song spread. The emperor returned to the drone's vision. Through its mechanical eyes, he watched fires dot the landscape like stars reflected on soil. Every camp sang the same fractured tune. Different voices, different faces, but one rhythm. The song traveled through ruins, past broken highways, across rivers clogged with ash. It didn't need technology. It didn't need permission. It lived in their throats like breath, and it began to infect his empire. Drones recorded it. Officers in the lower command tiers heard it in intercepted transmissions. Some ignored it. Some analyzed it. But a few listened. They didn't understand the language. But something about it stirred a memory buried too deep to kill. In the upper rings of the war fleet, Commander Val, a being bred for perfect precision, stood alone in his chamber, staring at the recording of a child singing amid rubble. His kind did not feel emotion, but when he pressed his hand against his chest, something fluttered. Something he didn't have a word for. Below, in the shipyards, engineers hummed fragments of the melody without knowing why. In a prison hold, an alien guard found himself staring at the night sky, whispering the strange human rhythm under his breath. It spread like light through cracks in glass. The Empire did not know how to fight this, and high above it all, the Emperor stood on the observation cradle again. Earth hung beneath him, scarred but burning with human light. He remembered something he had once buried beneath eternity's weight, before he became Emperor, before he conquered his own gods. He remembered standing beneath a sky of 2 moons, hearing someone laugh beside him, a sound warm and foolish, a sound he had silenced forever. Now another people laughed, another people sang, and it felt like the universe itself had turned to face him and whispered, "You lost something, long ago." The council screamed in the neural web, "Destroy them now. Silence the noise." But the Emperor whispered into the void, "What if this is what I was searching for all along?" A dangerous thought, a thought that could unravel an empire built on eternity. The Emperor looked down at the burning blue world. The song rose again, not loud, not grand, but unstoppable, and as he stood at the edge of forever, the god of silence realized, a people who can sing beneath ashes are a people who can never truly be conquered. The first whisper of rebellion wasn't on Earth, it was in him. Silence was once the Empire's greatest strength. It was the foundation upon which every command was obeyed, every conquest executed, every thought made uniform. No questions, no songs, no dreams, only perfect obedience. But now, there was a whisper in the dark, the human song. A sound soft enough to be ignored, a sound dangerous enough to break eternity. The Council of the Unyielding convened in the black sphere above the throne spire. Their presence filled the neural lattice with a sharp, metallic vibration, the soundless scream of minds built to never feel. The noise spreads. Commanders hear it, engineers hum it, drones repeat it. Order is cracking. The immortal Emperor stood among them, his long figure cloaked in shadow. His eyes, pale, ancient, once cold as dead sun, flickered with something alive, something the Council could not name. It is not noise, he said softly. It is a pulse. Error. Humans carry corruption. Silence is order. Silence is survival. And yet, the Emperor whispered, their noise survives even in ruins. The Council's shared will pressed against his mind, cold and hard like metal. For 10,000 years he had commanded them with flawless certainty. But tonight their certainty felt like chains. The Empire must be cleansed. Earth must burn entirely. He did not answer. He only turned away. And for the first time in the history of his reign, he ignored them. Across the Empire's fleet, the infection grew. On orbital platforms, soldiers began tapping fingers against railings in rhythm to a song they didn't understand. Pilots stared longer at the stars, whispering notes they should not know. Technicians hummed beneath their breath as they worked. Their movements no longer perfectly synchronized but subtly human. And no matter how much the overseers recalibrated their neural implants, the song found its way back. It was not technology. It was a feeling. The Emperor walked through the Hall of Commanders, a cathedral of polished black metal where discipline was worshipped like a god. Rows of soldiers stood in perfect formation, statues in living flesh. No one breathed out of rhythm, but as he passed he heard it, tap, 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 one heartbeat, then another, a pulse rising under their skin. It wasn't rebellion in the old sense. No banners, no speeches, just a quiet, defiant rhythm that no rule could erase. He stopped before a commander, Val, the one who had lingered too long on the child's song. His hands twitched subtly against his armor. The Emperor saw it. The Council would have executed him instantly, but the Emperor did not strike. He simply asked, "Do you hear it?" Val's lips trembled. Their kind was not made to speak out of turn. But the words escaped anyway. Yes. It was the first word spoken in that hall in centuries. The sound was small, but to the Emperor it thundered like a collapsing star. Down on Earth, humans did not know they had infected an empire. They only knew they were alive. The song grew with each campfire. It wove itself into lullabies, into whispered prayers, into the silent tears of those who buried their dead. And slowly, unknowingly, their hope reached the stars. A young girl in a ruined church traced the shape of a star with her finger on a cracked ceiling, singing to herself. A soldier near the northern ruins built a radio tower from scavenged parts, broadcasting not coordinates or pleas for help, but the song. The signal was weak. But weakness was its strength. It slipped through the Empire's defenses like wind through a keyhole. The Emperor felt it, not through machines, not through war, but through the emptiness inside himself that the song kept filling. The Council struck back. They deployed silencers, fields of null frequency meant to scrub sound, thought, even emotion from the air. They sent purge fleets to camps that still resisted. Towers fell, fires died, voices were drowned beneath waves of quiet, but the humans sang louder. And what the Council did not understand, what the Emperor slowly began to, was that hope does not die in silence. It thrives there. When their towers burned, they sang. When their camps were crushed, they whispered. And when they could no longer speak, their eyes carried the song forward. In the palace, the Emperor stood before a mirror of living crystal. It showed not his reflection, but his memory, a younger face unscarred by eternity. A mortal face. He watched it and whispered, "What did I bury to become this?" The mirror offered no answer, but faintly in the distance of his mind. The song rose again. A strange question formed in him like a sun cracking through frost. If they can still hope while dying, What can they become if they live? He gripped the edge of the mirror, his strength bending crystal like clay, a god of 1,000 stars, and yet for the first time he felt small. Across the Empire, something unprecedented began to unfold. A group of soldiers, led by Commander Val, began gathering in the lower decks of the flagship. Not for war, not for mutiny, for listening. The song became their secret meeting place, a code no machine could decode. They had no plan, no weapons, just a feeling they could not let go of, and the Emperor knew. He could feel the pulse echo through the lattice of his empire, and he did not stop it. The Council's voice tore through the throne's neural core. "You will lose everything," he whispered back. "Perhaps I never had anything." Far below, Earth's fires flickered like a heartbeat. Above, an empire built on silence began to shiver. And in between, a god who could not understand hope began to feel it. The first fractures were no longer cracks in the Emperor's heart. They were spreading everywhere. The night above the colony fractured like glass. The first sign wasn't the sound, and it was the light. A pale fissure of silver opened in the clouds, stretching wider and wider until it bled across the stars like a wound in the firmament. The entire horizon trembled as a vibration deep beneath the surface groaned like an awakening beast. Commander Kale had seen alien fleets. He'd seen atmospheric detonations. But this was not war. This was arrival. High above, the storm boiled inward. The fissure pulsed with a steady rhythm. Thump, 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 like the heartbeat of a god pressing its fist against the membrane between universes. The sky burned white, and something began to push through. A colossal ring of obsidian metal emerged, its surface covered in geometric veins of amber light. It wasn't a ship in any human sense. It was a gate carved not by hands but by intention, a living construct that hummed with impossible intelligence. "Signals off the charts," shouted Dr. Aaron from the command deck. "We're not detecting heat signatures. No propulsion, it's resonating." Kale clenched his jaw. Resonating with what? The answer came before she could speak. Every device in the colony flickered. Lights dimmed. Air systems coughed. Then the resonance found them. It wasn't sound. It wasn't sight. It was a pressure in the bones, a silent, crushing awareness. A feeling that something on the other side of the gate was looking back. Thousands of colonists stumbled in the streets, clutching their skulls. A few screamed and fell. A few smiled as if some invisible choir had begun to sing only for them. And then the gate opened. A surge of energy lashed out like the tail of a comet, slicing through the defensive grid as if it were mist. The colony's atmosphere generators imploded one by one. Sirens howled. Kale barked orders, but the comms were already collapsing under interference. "Evacuation protocols online," someone yelled. "They're jamming everything, everything." The pressure in the air thickened. Static crackled across the ground like veins of lightning. A shape began to form inside the gate. Not fully material, but shifting between states of existence like a half-forgotten nightmare trying to remember itself. Kale raised his head, and for the first time in years his heart faltered. It was taller than the colony itself. It had no eyes, no face, no symmetry. A fluid architecture, that moving, breathing, thinking. And though no mouth existed, Kale heard it speak, not with words. With certainty. "You are late." Every human on the ground froze. Minds burned with images not their own. Visions of stars bending, of civilization swallowed whole, of a covenant made long before Earth had language. Kale staggered, clutching his temple. What are you?" he whispered. The answer wasn't spoken. It was felt. "We were here before your sun learned to burn." As the figure fully crossed the threshold, the fissure in the sky shattered completely. Shards of light rained like burning snow, each one humming like the echo of a dying star. The war that humanity had prepared for was not coming. It had already arrived. The instant the entity crossed the gate, the world stopped breathing. Winds froze in mid-gust. Flames died without smoke. Even the hum of the colony's reactors was swallowed in a crushing, unnatural hush. It wasn't simply silence, it was absence. Sound itself had been erased. Commander Kale couldn't even hear the pounding of his own heart. He turned his head sharply toward the observation tower and saw Dr. Aaron's mouth moving, screaming, pleading, but no sound reached him. The air felt thick like a drowning ocean, pressing against lungs that could no longer find rhythm. Above them, the entity unfolded. Its limbs were not limbs. Its shape was not fixed. Every second, its geometry bent and reformed, like a cathedral of shifting shadows and alive and intentional. And then, it exhaled. The ground rippled. Buildings buckled as if struck by invisible tides. Hundreds of colonists were flung backward in dead silence, their bodies falling like scattered petals. Kyle staggered, clutching his chest. The entity's presence wasn't merely seen. It was inside him, probing his thoughts with ancient curiosity. Memories fractured. His mind flickered between past and present. The war on Europa, the dying stars above Titan, the promise he made to never let another colony fall. You built a wall against the tide. The entity's voice vibrated inside his skull. And now you will learn why tides do not ask for permission. The colony's defense systems roared to life, or tried to. Cannons pivoted toward the gate, launching kinetic rounds that evaporated before impact. Plasma bursts turned to streams of useless light. The entity moved through them like smoke through fingers. Dr. Aaron slammed her hands on the emergency console. No sound came out, but the alert lights pulsed red, one after another, until the board turned solid crimson, critical failure. Core collapse imminent. Kale forced his legs forward through the weight of the air, reaching the nearest command rail. He triggered the failsafe override. A ghostly hum echoed through the structure as the planetary Aegis grid activated. A translucent shield rose over the colony like the shell of a dying star, their last defense. For a heartbeat, the world glimmered with hope. Then the entity touched the shield. Not a strike. Not an attack, just a touch. The shield shattered like glass meeting the ocean. A wave of invisible force erupted from the impact, flattening towers and tearing ships from their moorings. Colonists were lifted from the ground, screaming soundlessly into the void. Kale's body slammed against a wall, his vision flooding with white. Through the haze, he saw something worse, far worse than the destruction. The entity was gathering them. Colonists, soldiers, children, and all being pulled upward in slow, deliberate streams toward its shifting core. Their bodies dissolved into light as they were absorbed like sparks devoured by a black flame. Dr. Aaron reached out, tears streaking her face. Kale lunged forward, catching her arm before she was taken. His grip slipped, her eyes widened, and she vanished upward in a stream of silver particles. Kyle fell to his knees. He could still feel her in the air. Alive yet, not. This is not conquest. The voice coiled around him like a whisper made of gravity. This is harvest. The sky above cracked wider. More rings were emerging. This was not one entity. It was the first, and humanity was already too late. The dawn that followed wasn't dawn at all. The sky over the colony was a scar, torn wide by the gate, bleeding cold light. Ash and frost floated through the air like dead snow, and the world trembled beneath the weight of the thing that now hung above them. But Kale was still breathing. He woke in the shattered remains of the command deck, ribs screaming with every inhale. Blood dripped into his eyes. The colony's once glorious defense hub was now just a skeleton of metal, twisted into the shape of despair. Half of the surviving monitors still flickered with static. The rest were dead, melted, crushed, or simply gone. But one thing burned steady on the main screen. Living signals, 214. Out of 72,000 colonists. Only 214 remained. He forced himself up. Kyle, come in. The voice crackled through a half-broken comm bead lodged in his ear. It was Lieutenant Mara, communications officer, stubborn to a fault and one of the few still breathing. If you're alive, Commander. We've got survivors in the lower caverns. You need to see this. Kyle limped through the ruins, each step echoing against the hollow silence. The air stank of ozone and burnt circuitry. Shadows of those taken lingered like ghosts. Outlines scorched into walls by whatever force had pulled them into the entity. He reached the cavern hatch. A dull orange light glowed beneath the cracks, and then he heard it. For the first time since the entity appeared. Sound. Human sound. Laughter, crying, whispered prayers. The echoes of people who had refused to disappear. He pushed through the hatch and descended. The cavern had been an old mining site, carved long before the colony became a city. Now it was a refuge. Tattered blankets lined the rock walls. Children huddled around flickering lanterns. Soldiers patched wounds with shaking hands. And at the center, Mara stood over a strange metal structure embedded deep in the stone. "What is that?" Kale rasped. She turned, pale but alive. "We didn't build it. We found it. Buried here long before the colony existed." Kale's eyes narrowed. The structure was a perfect circle, pulsing faintly with golden veins, unlike any human technology. And carved into its surface were symbols he didn't recognize, but somehow felt like they were older than language. When the entity arrived, Mara whispered, "This thing." Woke up. A low hum filled the cavern. The golden veins brightened and an image burst into the air, a holographic map not of the colony, but of a network. Lines stretching across star systems, linking world to world like arteries in a living body. At the center of it all was a single point, marked in burning red. Sol, Earth. Kale's breath caught. This wasn't a coincidence. The entity wasn't here by chance. It was moving along this network, world by world, and humanity's home was the final node. Mara stepped closer, voice trembling. "This isn't just some artifact. It's a message. Someone knew this would happen. Someone left this for us." Kyle placed his hand on the warm metal. Images flashed across his mind like lightning. Worlds burning, fleets scattering. An ancient war between light and shadow. And buried beneath it all, a single phrase pulsing through the void like a heartbeat. "The ember must be carried." He staggered back, clutching his head. The meaning was unclear, but the weight was real. He looked around at the survivors, wounded soldiers, terrified civilians, a child holding a broken toy like it still meant something. They didn't have weapons strong enough to kill a god. But maybe they had something the god didn't understand. Hope. Kale clenched his fists. "We're not running. We're going to hit back." Mara stared at him. "With what?" His eyes burned like coals. "With everything they told us was impossible." Above, the entity shifted in the sky, sensing movement. Its attention turned toward the caverns. Time was running out, but for the first time since the silence began, the humans were not afraid. The ember had been found. And the ember was about to burn. The world above was dying. The world below was waking up. The cavern trembled as the alien structure's veins glowed brighter, golden light pulsing like the slow, steady beat of a sleeping heart. The survivors, scattered, blood-stained, exhausted, gathered around the circle in a fragile silence. Something ancient was breathing beneath their feet. Kyle stood at the center, every muscle screaming from wounds he had no time to feel. He looked up at the curved stone ceiling as dust fell like snow. The entity outside was growing restless. Its shadow rippled through the air, distorting reality like heat above a furnace. But down here, they had found the only thing in the universe it did not expect. Lieutenant Mara knelt beside the structure, hands hovering over the glowing veins. "Kyle, it's responding to our biosignatures," she whispered. "This thing isn't just a weapon." "It's listening," he frowned. "Listening to what?" She met his eyes. "To us." The air thickened. The hum shifted, resonating with every heartbeat in the cavern. The golden veins began aligning into new patterns, forming a spiral that lifted from the floor like a crown of light. Images spilled into the chamber, not spoken, not written, but felt. A battlefield. A billion stars. An empire collapsing beneath the weight of something they could not kill. And among the ruins, humans. Fragile, chaotic, unpredictable humans. Winning where gods had fallen. The survivors gasped as the vision ended. A boy of maybe 10 whispered, "It knows us." Kale stepped closer, placing his hand on the pulsing core. The structure flared. A blinding wave of golden light swept through every person in the cavern. For a moment, their pain dulled. Their fear quieted. It felt warm. Alive. As if something had wrapped itself around their broken souls and whispered, "You matter." Mara's console flickered to life, feeding data directly from the artifact. "Kale, it's called the Ember Node. Some kind of ancient failsafe left behind by a civilization that fought the entity before." "They lost," Kale said flatly. "Yes," Mara breathed. "But they left this." Suddenly the cavern shook. Dust cascaded from above. The entity had found them. Its massive shape loomed beyond the broken surface. a silhouette of living darkness peering down like a god smelling rebellion. The survivors panicked. Some ran, some prayed, some stood still, their will cracking beneath the weight of inevitability. Kyle didn't flinch. He walked to the edge of the artifact as the light swelled around him like a living sun. "Mara, can it fight?" Her fingers flew across the screen. "No, but it can amplify us. Neural patterns, bioenergy, emotion." Kyle understood then. This wasn't a weapon of metal or plasma, it was a weapon of belief. "We're the power source," he said. "It feeds on what the entity can't comprehend. Hope." The cavern erupted in chaos as the first tendrils of the entity pierced the rock, slithering through like liquid void. Screams echoed. Soldiers raised their rifles, useless against what they faced. But Kale raised his voice, steady as iron. "Look at me." The sound cut through panic like a blade. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. They think we're finished. They think we're weak. They don't understand what we are. A tendril crashed down, shattering stone meters away. Kale didn't move. "We laugh in hunger. We smile in loss. We bleed, but we don't kneel. This thing may have taken our sky, but it will never touch what burns in here." He pressed his hand against his chest. "Feed it. Feed the ember with everything they said couldn't win." The survivors closed their eyes. Some whispered prayers. Some whispered names. Some clenched their fists, remembering the faces they lost. The air grew warm. The ember flared like a newborn star. Light poured upward, pure, radiant human light slamming into the tendrils. The black matter shrieked, recoiling as if touched by fire. The entity staggered back, its perfect silence cracked by a sound it had never heard before. Human defiance. The ember rose like a sun beneath the earth. Golden light licked through the cracks, spilling to the surface. For the first time since the invasion began, the entity stepped back. Kale's breathing was ragged, but his voice was steady. "Good," he whispered. "Now we make it bleed." The cavern ceiling crumbled, and the first battle of the Ember War began. The entity towered above the fractured colony like a god descending upon a broken cathedral. But gods, Kale thought, weren't supposed to bleed. The golden light from the ember pulsed through the ruins, tearing through the night like the heartbeat of something reborn. Where the entity's tendrils touched it, the black matter curled back, screeching without sound like a shadow scorched by dawn. But above the void and beyond the gate, he was watching. The Emperor. For centuries, the Emperor had consumed civilizations like drifting embers, snuffing them out before they became flames. He had seen species kneel in terror, beg for mercy, crumble under eternity. None had ever pushed back. None had ever glowed with this impossible light. He leaned forward upon his obsidian throne, his formless shape swirling like a star trapped inside a shadow. The golden flare below fascinated him. They resist. They burn. They hope. The word was foreign to him. Hope was the language of those who die young. And he did not die. He had not died for 10,000 years. He had never needed hope. Below, Kale led the survivors out of the caverns and into the burning streets. The colony was half ash, half battlefield now, a jagged graveyard of steel and flame. But the survivors no longer crept like prey. They ran with purpose. The ember pulsed behind them, rising like a sphere of living light, its energy wrapping around their bodies like armor they didn't have to wear. Weapons that had once been useless now hummed with golden charge. A railgun shot from the perimeter cannon ripped through the entity's outer veil like sunlight-piercing fog. For the first time since its arrival, the entity reeled. "Fire!" Kyle shouted. A storm of golden-tinged projectiles arced into the night sky, smashing against the colossal silhouette. Black shards of its form splintered off into the air like burning ash. The survivors roared, a human sound, messy and raw and alive. Inside his throne of shadow, the Emperor tilted his head. In all the galaxies he had devoured, no human sound had ever echoed like that in his skull. It was not fear. It was not reverence, it was defiance. Why do they fight after they have lost? He shifted his form and stepped through the gate. The sky tore open wider, spilling darkness across the horizon. Towers bent beneath the pressure of his arrival. The entity froze mid-attack, as if the shadow of its creator had silenced even its hunger. When the Emperor emerged, reality bent to make space. His presence didn't just touch the world, it rewrote it, and still, the humans did not run. Kyle stood at the shattered street center, plasma rifle humming with golden energy. Mara stood beside him, her hand still on the ember console wired into her neural link. The survivors, barely more than 200, formed a jagged front line behind them. "That's him," Mara whispered. "Yeah," Kale breathed. "Let's make him remember us." The Emperor hovered above them, shifting between 1,000 forms, none human, but all watching them with something that felt uncomfortably close to curiosity. "You are not the first to resist." His voice was not sound. It was inside their heads. "But you are the first to hope." Mara clenched her fists. "Good, then we'll be the first to win." The Emperor didn't strike. He could have. A single thought and the colony would vanish into vapor. But instead he hovered, observing, hesitating. Why? Because he did not understand why they were still standing. Humans should have broken, should have begged, should have surrendered. Instead, a wounded commander stared back at him with burning eyes. A child clung to a broken toy behind the line, refusing to cry. A medic tied his last bandage around someone else's arm, not his own. They lived like their dying meant something. The Emperor lowered his shape toward Kale. "Why do you laugh?" the voice said. "When the dark has already taken everything?" Kale felt the weight of those words clawing at his soul. He saw faces of the lost, Dr. Aaron, the colonists, the world they'd built. But he didn't look down. He didn't cry, he smiled. "Because you don't get to decide what everything means." The ember flared, answering his heartbeat. A surge of golden energy leapt outward, striking the Emperor like a hammer made of 1,000 silent prayers. The impact shook the gate itself, cracking its edges like porcelain. The Emperor stepped back, not out of pain, but shock. He had never been touched like that. Not by armies. Not by gods. Not by time. Only by humans. All across the battlefield, survivors screamed with raw, burning fury and hope. The Emperor looked at them, really looked, and for the first time in 10,000 years something he did not have coiled in his chest like a storm. Envy. They have something I do not. Kyle raised his weapon, the golden fire of the ember swirling around him. "Welcome to humanity, Emperor." The Emperor hesitated, and the war truly began. The air split like a wound. Above the burning colony, the Emperor unfurled his full form. Not the vague silhouette he had cast before, but the true shape of his fury. The gate behind him pulsed like a black sun. Whole pieces of the sky folded inward, as if the universe itself bent to his anger. This was no mere invasion now. This was judgment. The ember's golden glow spread like a living flame across the broken streets, wrapping the survivors in its warmth. But even that light trembled beneath the Emperor's roar. It wasn't sound that shook them. It was a command woven into the fabric of existence. Kale fell to one knee, every nerve screaming as gravity inverted, fractured, and then pressed down with crushing force. Mara screamed, clutching the neural interface as the ember's light fought to stay lit. Around them, survivors were flung like rag dolls, shields cracking under invisible pressure. "You dare touch me. You dare burn in my night." The Emperor's voice crawled through their skulls like cold fire. The entity, the creature they had fought earlier, bent low before him like a beast before its master. From its form sprouted more shadows, more soldiers of the void. 1,000 black tendrils erupted outward, striking the perimeter like falling stars. Kale forced himself to stand, blood running down his temple. The ember pulsed weakly in response to his heartbeat. He whispered almost to himself, "Not yet." "We're not done." Mara knelt beside him, eyes wide and glassy. "He's too strong, Kale. The ember isn't enough." "No," Kale rasped. "The ember isn't supposed to be enough. We are." Outside, darkness and light collided in violent arcs. The Emperor descended toward the ground like a storm-given shape. Where his presence touched, concrete crumbled. Steel melted. Time itself seemed to flicker and still. Humans stood. They fired railguns charged with golden energy. They ran into shadows with torches that should have died, and when the darkness swallowed them, someone else took their place. The Emperor watched this with something alien and unbearable boiling in his core. Why? Do they not break? Why do they still fight when there is no hope? He swept a hand across the battlefield. Entire rows of soldiers were thrown skyward, screaming, their bodies reduced to ash before they could fall. The ember flared in pain, its light shrinking. Kale felt the burn of despair clawing at him. His breath came shallow. His arms shook, his vision narrowed to the golden core floating in the distance. It flickered like a dying star, and then he heard it, not a command, not a scream, but a laugh. A single child, the boy who had whispered "It knows us" in the cavern, sat on the rubble, bloodied and bruised, laughing through his tears. It was raw, defiant, incomprehensible to the Emperor. The Emperor turned. His shape froze. Kyle's throat tightened. That laugh, fragile, unbroken, was the spark. One sound. And every survivor heard it. They didn't have weapons that could destroy gods. But they had something gods could not understand. You hear that? Kale said hoarsely. He doesn't get it. Mara wiped the blood from her cheek. Then let's make him listen. They linked their hands to the Ember console. One by one, others joined. Soldiers, medics, engineers, old men, a child with a broken toy. The Ember pulsed with their emotions, absorbing fear and transmuting it into light. Not the clean, perfect light of stars. The messy humankind streaked with pain, stubbornness, and hope. The golden radiance burst upward in a wave. It hit the Emperor like a living tide, smashing through his form and cracking the black veil that cloaked him. He roared. The gate behind him, quivering like a beast, struck through the heart. For the first time in a millennium, the Emperor staggered. This is not power, he growled. This is weakness clothed in flame. Kale raised his voice, ragged but unbroken. No, this is what you'll never have. The Emperor lunged forward, his form collapsing into a spear of black light aimed straight at Kale. Mara screamed his name, and the Ember responded. The light around them exploded, bending space like a supernova in human skin. The blast engulfed the battlefield. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Shadows screamed. Gold consumed black. When the light faded, the colony was a ruin of scorched earth. The Emperor hovered at the edge of the gate, his form cracked, leaking ribbons of dark energy like a wounded god. He had never been wounded before. And for the first time, he felt fear. Above the battlefield, the gate shuddered. More armies of darkness were gathering. This was not the end. It was the beginning of the war humanity was never meant to survive. But Kale looked up at the wounded Emperor and whispered, "We made a god bleed." The survivors roared beneath a broken sky. The battlefield was quiet for the first time in days. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the sharp, ringing stillness that follows a storm so powerful the world can't breathe. Above the scorched colony, the Emperor hung suspended before the trembling gate, his once flawless form now cracked and leaking shadows like spilled night. His rage had shaken the stars. His presence had bent the earth. But for the first time in 10,000 years, he was bleeding. Below him, Kale stood on shattered ground, one arm limp, face streaked with ash and blood. Around him were barely more than 100 survivors, a scattered army held together by nothing but hope and the burning pulse of the Ember, which floated now like a golden star over the ruins. The Emperor tilted his fractured head, studying them with something he had no word for. His voice shook not with fury, but confusion. "Why won't you kneel?" Kale's breath came in shallow bursts, but his gaze was steady. "Because kneeling is for those who've lost their reason to stand. You are weak, fragile, finite. Exactly." Kyle spat blood. "And that's why we fight." The Emperor descended slowly, his shadow rippling across the dead soil like smoke. He reached out a hand made of shifting void, wrapping it around the Ember's glow. But the moment his touch grazed it, his form shuddered. Not from pain, from something worse, memory, laughter and hunger, smiles in the dark, mothers whispering prayers over graves, a dying soldier holding a friend's hand, a child laughing through tears. The Ember showed him humanity, not their strength in war, but the fire they carried in their fragile, breakable lives. The Emperor staggered back. He couldn't control it. He had conquered empires. He had erased gods. But he could not understand why the faces in those memories did not break. "You should fear me." Kyle stepped forward. "We do every second. But fear isn't the end of us. It's where we begin." All around him, the survivors began to rise. Not as soldiers, not as heroes, as people. A woman wrapped her arm around her injured son. A man lit a flare against the wind. An old engineer whispered a prayer, tears in his eyes. The boy with the broken toy lifted it toward the sky. The Ember pulsed brighter, no longer just a weapon. A mirror, a voice, a heartbeat. The Emperor screamed. Black tendrils lashed across the ruins, tearing through metal and dust. The gate behind him howled, armies of darkness pushing at its edges, desperate to break through. But the light of the ember spread out in waves, not striking like a blade, but burning like dawn. "Mara," Kyle whispered, never looking away from the Emperor. "Yeah?" she breathed. "Let's finish it." Mara's hand plunged into the ember console. Golden light rushed through her veins. Kale followed. Then one by one every survivor placed their hands, or whatever strength they had left, into the light. Fear, love, rage, laughter, hope. The ember drank it all. A golden storm erupted from the ground and speared through the Emperor's chest. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The Emperor roared, shadows tearing apart like fabric set aflame. His perfect form split open, revealing a swirling void inside, endless, cold, and alone. For the first time in his eternity, he felt not power, but emptiness. "What are you?" he gasped. Kale whispered, "Human." The ember exploded. The golden wave surged outward, not to kill, but to rewrite. The tendrils burned to nothing. The gate convulsed, its edges cracking like porcelain struck by a hammer. The armies of darkness screamed as their link to this world collapsed. The Emperor fell to his knees, choking on a sensation he had never known. He reached toward the humans not in wrath, but in envy. And then the gate imploded, dragging his crumbling form back into the void, sealing itself with a blinding flash. Silence. For the first time in weeks, the wind over the colony was just wind. Kale collapsed to the ground, Mara beside him. Around them, the survivors stared at the rising sun, weak, pale, but real. Their home was ashes, their future uncertain, but they were alive. "We made a god bleed," Mara whispered. Kyle closed his eyes, feeling the ember's warmth fade gently into the earth. "No," he murmured. "We made him understand." Epilogue centuries later. Deep in the cold between galaxies, a faint golden spark burned in the dark. No armies, no ships, just light. Somewhere in the void, the Emperor drifted, not gone but changed. In the ruins of his endless mind, one memory refused to fade. A starving child laughing at the dark. He could destroy worlds, but he could not destroy that. And for the first time in forever, the Emperor envied and hoped.